Welcome to our seminar, Radio Silence. Don't despair, spring to Q2 success. It can be so frustrating, can't it, right? You have a great meeting or series of meetings, it looks like you're going to close, and then all of a sudden, radio silence. So how could it be true that when your prospect goes radio silent, you could actually sprint to success in Q2? And we're going to draw on ideas from my book, Innovate Now. So thanks for joining us. Now, why do we set aside time like this to improve? We draw on the inspiration from the book E-Myth, Why Small Businesses Don't Work, What to Do About It. The central metaphor in the book E-Myth is that too many people spend time working in the business only versus on the business. So the metaphor here is day to day we're doing our selling, but when we meet like this, we're working on the business. We're trying to get better at what we do. It's a time to sharpen our game, ask questions. And we know our minds function best when they're open like a parachute. By the way, is there a less painful version of radio silence, which is also difficult that we confront? How about the I'm good objection? What do you say when the prospect says, I'm good? And if we could stay with I'm good for a minute, very often you'll get I'm good, and the prospect is putting forward a veneer. They're actually drowning, and our job is to save them from themselves. In effect, to become a trusted advisor when we overcome the I'm good objection. So something to be thoughtful about is, what do you say in the next 20 seconds when the prospect says, I'm good? And here I recommend that you have a little script written out and pasted on your desk. The script could include something like, gee, I'm surprised to hear you say that. You're just good, you're not fantastic. All of my clients, they all demand fantastic. So we should have a prepared script for that. Now, how can we be sprinting to success when we're facing radio silence or the I'm good objection? What makes it possible? Well, it's the underlying fundamentals, right? If the fundamentals are off at our prospect, at our client, the prospect hasn't solved the problem, we still have a vibrant opportunity. So the qualifier here is there's a gap. The fundamentals are off. They're not hitting their numbers. They're not hitting their objectives. Now, the reversal curve could sometimes explain why they've gone radio silent, right? So very often we look at a selling process as linear. You have your first call, your second call, your third call, your fourth call, and your close. But when we're facing the I'm good objection, or more likely we're facing radio silence, we may be facing the reversal curve. So what does that mean? We have the first meeting. It's a great meeting. The prospect swears eternal fealty to us, and then they go to the bottom of the reversal curve, the trough, the bottom. It's when they won't respond to us. Now, why would that happen? Why would we have a great meeting and then they don't respond to us? Well, one reason could be they had a great meeting because they focused on you, but when you walked out of the door, they remembered they had 100 things they had to do. And another possibility is there's an incumbent solution, so they really don't have to change tomorrow. And sometimes the incumbency is doing nothing. It's actually doing nothing. So actually what we do in selling is we often go through one reversal after another till we get to the finish line. And we need to use a mix of yin and yang, hard moves and soft moves, to move the process forward. Now here's an example of what consistent follow-up did with respect to one prospect. After 6 months radio silence, and this is a Fortune 500 company, the salesperson got this message. I apologize for what seems avoidance, but is not. Your persistence is a source of inspiration. And as we write our 2020 plan, I'm actively looking at how we can engage. Congratulations with your book. An important qualifier here for going forward is usually, and I'll describe later an exception, usually we want to see a strong PIK. Now, what's a PIK? It's a payment in kind. It's what the prospect does to show seriousness that they're engaged in the process. For instance, they could introduce us to a supervisor or a CEO, putting political capital at risk. That's a PIK. They could check a reference. They could visit our facility. They could take us on a tour of their facility. They could complete a credit application. So when the fundamentals are off and a PIK is present, you could sprint to success. Now, I want to explain or review a model of CEO decision making that helps better understand why do we have the radio silence. And by the way, it's important to start at the top. We're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about escalation strategies, but it's important to start at the top with the CEO. Well, whether or not you start at the top, let's say step one is the CEO has this mindset. I'm interested in information. I'm not ready to take any action. So no action yet. Step two, you know what? I'm unhappy with what's going on in one of the departments in the business, but I'm going to give the executive in charge or the department head some time to fix it, maybe 6 to 12 months. That's step two in the process. Step three, I'm so unhappy, I want to do something. And one option is to get somebody in to coach the executive as to how to fix the situation. Step four, I can't coach the executive. I need a resource to work directly with him. So step three was coaching me. Step four is coach the executive. And then step five is I got to bring somebody in to handle the issue. It's not working. We still have a problem. So the cusp or the change point or the tipping point is between 2 and 3 when the CEO is saying, I'm happy, but I'm going to give the executive in charge some time. And step 3 is, I'm so unhappy, we got to do something. Now, what brings the CEO to the precipice of action, and particularly during Q1 of the year? You got a department head who's saying, you know what, I just need one more quarter, boss. I could turn this situation around. But the CEO has had it. He or she wants action now. So the CEO is saying, how am I going to hit my numbers? If they're on a calendar year, which ends December 31st, the CEO is saying, how am I going to hit my numbers this year? We need action now. Whereas the department head may be saying, hey, I could, give me another quarter. Don't worry, we got plenty of time. Well, the CEO says, we don't have plenty of time. We have to act now. And whether it's bringing in a coach for me, bringing in a coach for the head of the department, bringing in a new vendor, that might be a scenario, you're a new vendor. The CEO wants action now. Now, what really is the ultimate cause of stimulating the action is the idea that the prospect is on a false peak. See, the prospect all too often is on a peak of success and they're looking down. And our job is to get them to look up and notice it's a false peak, that there's a higher peak of well-being we could bring them to. And how do we bring them to that higher peak of well-being? We're going to do it with some type 3 knowledge. Now, bear in mind when the prospect says, I'm good, right? When the prospect says, I'm good, your response to I'm good, you got 20 seconds again because he or she, they're going to hang up the phone. If you're sufficiently consultative, it can become the doorway to becoming a trusted advisor. The I'm good scenario is often the portal. So taking a look at this illustration for a moment, very often we're on an unlevel playing field when we're doing our business development. The prospect has a competitor or an internal resource that's a trusted advisor, and we're on a transactional basis, right? So what we need to do is level the playing field, and showing the prospect how he or she is on a false peak or summit, doing it with type 3 knowledge is one way to do that. That's how we become a trusted advisor. So what would get the CEO's attention? What kind of messaging would we come out with? What I'm about to share with you was inspired by an induction worksheet driven from Francis Bacon's New Organon. And so if you have interest, let me know. I'll send you the induction worksheet. So the question or the thought process is, what would motivate a CEO to take a meeting with you? What are the red flags, the forward-looking metrics they look at, that a CEO would look at? Here are some of the issues we have here. Cultural problems or turnover. That would be a red flag to a CEO. I'm having problems staffing key positions, particularly direct reports to the CEO. The most fundamental is usually the key KPIs are off, the key performance indicators are off. Sales are off, profits are off, turnaround is off. Whatever is a KPI, key performance indicator, is off. You could help that KPI. The CEO is going to want to hear about it. There are outside changes in the economy or political, and boy, don't we have both of them going on the one hand with the coronavirus, and on the other hand with this being an election year, right? These are things that you can help with. These are issues the CEO is going to want to ultimately hear about. And then conflicts of interest between departments that have to be resolved by the CEO. If you could help with any of these or like kind of issues, the CEO is going to want to hear from you. Now, how do you package your message? You don't have a lot of time, and whether you leave a call and have 1 minute, leave a voicemail, or send a short email, we have a 5-step process here for conveying that message. It's kind of like an elevator pitch on steroids. So the first step is to share common ground. For instance, we have core value alignment. The second step of the message is to share a crisis. There's a real problem out there. That's the bad news. The good news is we have a solution. This is type 3 knowledge. What they don't realize, they don't know. It's only at that point that we go to the commercial, which is why customers select us, and then the proving or the certainty. We want to do this in no more than 150 words, and running time for a message no more than a minute. So here's an example. Common ground. Looking at your website, I see we share core value alignment on this core value, on teamwork, on integrity, on quality. There have been changes in the industry. There's a crisis. Or if you already had a meeting with the customer, you might have some inside information that a certain KPI is off. It's taking us too long to ship our product, or it's taking us too long to get back on a customer complaint. That's the bad news. So it's either internal or external bad news. That's the crisis. The good news is there's a solution. So it's bad news, good news. You're doing a 1-minute sitcom here. In a sitcom, there's a problem, usually a humorous one, and it's resolved by the end of 30 minutes. Well, you're introducing a crisis in step 2, you're resolving it in step 3. And ideally, whatever you have as a solution will help them deal with market randomness like the coronavirus. Step 4 is, why would a prospect select us? Why do customers select us? I mean, here's a typical kind of a framing. Customers have selected us for over 25 years because of our relentless execution, rigorous inspection and quality, and a culture of putting integrity first. Proving, certainty. Here's what our customers have to say about us. And particularly if you're doing an email, you should have a link, ideally, to a video testimonial, maybe 2 minutes. Now, here's why people select us. We maintain their operational efficiency. Target is not more than 150 words. The one that you have here on the screen is 94 words. So it will take you a good amount of time to write a very powerful 1-minute intro. Now, let's say that you've used your 1-minute intro, you've responded to the I'm good objection, it's still not going anywhere. It might be time for escalation. We have what we call the 3 strikes and you're out concept. What it means is if you approach a prospect 3 times and you make a powerful presentation and it's still not going anywhere, we recommend you consider escalation. Now, escalation can take 2 forms. One form would be putting stronger messaging and proving in. But if you have a prospective decision maker who's not responding, he or she is only looking at their own self-interest, their convenience. Maybe they're a price buyer, could be a jerk. You may need to go higher in the food chain, perhaps to the owner or the CEO, because the CEO cares about the organization in a way that sometimes a decision maker does not. And there's also an issue of risk here. A department head may be scored on how he or she does this month, whereas if a CEO sees risk in a decision, he or she can allocate that risk over many decision periods or quarters. So it unfortunately turns out that sometimes the gatekeeper decision maker, the person you're talking to, is like the fox guarding the hen house, where they're really only looking after their narrow self-interest and they're not looking after the interest of the organization. When this is so and you bring it to the CEO's attention, it helps you become a trusted advisor. Of course, there's risk involved at the same time, and you have to measure the risk of alienating the gatekeeper decision maker. However, it is one of the reasons why it's a great idea to start at the top. Here's a case history that illustrates the point. Once we were reviewing call reports for a salesperson who had visited a prospect every 3 weeks for 8 months, and all the sales calls read the reports, all the sales reports read the same. Had a meeting, good meeting, toured the plant, no need. By the way, this was a consumable we were selling that the prospect could have bought on every sales call. 3 weeks later, met with the prospect, went to lunch, good meeting, no needs. 3 weeks later, met with the prospect, discussed their need, no needs right now, good meeting. So this was a pattern that repeated over 8 months. And the VP of sales and I looked at it and finally said, my gosh, what's going on here? It looks like the salesperson's needs are being met. The salesperson has to report that they had so many sales calls per week, and the buyer's needs were being met. The buyer had to report that the buyer saw so many salespeople to justify her job. But in the meantime, our needs were not being met. We're going bankrupt. So we asked the salesperson to escalate, go higher, go to the president of the company. And reluctantly, the salesperson did that, called for the president. The switchboard operator or the receptionist, understanding what the salesperson did, actually switched back to the buyer. Buyer gets on the phone smoking mad saying, "You going around me? You want to know why I don't buy from you? Your pricing's too high, your quality's no good, and your service is no good. That's why I'm not buying from you." Wow. That was quite of a rebuke. Do you think the salesperson was glad to know that? The salesperson was sure glad to know it. The salesperson was wasting his time. So the recommendation is try to come in at the highest possible level. If it's not the CEO, if you're selling a manufactured product to manufacturing, the VP of manufacturing. And they'll refer you down to a decision maker lower in the organization in the food chain if that's appropriate. One time we went around the room, I remember, with a sales team. What percentage of the CEOs do you know and can you call on? 5%, 10%, 20%, 15%, 60%, says one salesperson, 15%, 20%, 30%. So we went to one salesperson who could call 60% and said, "How is this so?" And he said, "Well, I always start at the top and then I get referred down." So this is an important part of selling, is going as high as you can in the food chain. Well, at the same time that you prepare your 1-minute script, pursue your battle plans. Your battle plan is a way to be thoughtful about a prospect that merits thoughtfulness. And you want to look at your selling tools carefully and make sure they're using them at reasonable iterations, like in this case, 1 week. So these are the yin moves, the soft moves to reinforce the calls that you make when you call on the phone. So you'll call with your 1-minute drill, particularly if you're leaving a message, but then you'll send things. You'll send testimonials, letters, articles, things of value to the prospect to remind them that you exist. Now, some statistically relevant part of our prospect group, where the fundamentals are right and they've given us a PIK, they're ready to act right now. And if they're radio silent, we don't know. So the way we deal with this is we have $5 good of opportunity in the pipeline for every dollar we need to sell. Load your pipeline up with battle plans where the fundamentals are right and where there are PIKs. Here's another case of, after 6 months, an email that a salesperson received. "Sorry, I've been remiss in getting back to you. I was promoted to president, and as such, I'm more focused on preparing. It takes place March 1. Once I figure out how we stand, I'll reach out to you. Thanks, and wishing you all the best." So here's somebody who for 6 months we reached out, we did our battle plan, we did our follow-up, and then all of a sudden the prospect reaches out to us. An important reminder: genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, right? This is attributed to Thomas Edison, which means today we're working on inspiration. You're going to have to do the perspiration yourself. That means hard work. You got to make sure you perspire enough. For myself, for 30 years, I've been working an average of, let's say, 70 hours a week. I perspire a lot. Yeah. The harder you work, the luckier you get. So what did we discuss today in today's webinar? Radio silence or the "I'm good" objection doesn't mean the opportunity is dead. Focus on the fundamentals. Do they have an unmet need? And in particular, is there a PIK? Have a strong 1-minute drill or email. Have it on your desk. Work your battle plans, and remember, genius is 99% perspiration. Well, we know Rome wasn't built in a day. We're just about at the end. We have time for a call. We have a question coming in, rather. Do you ever give up? Is there ever a time when you give up? Well, my feeling is, at a minimum on a drip campaign and maybe a quarterly checkup, if there's a fundamental problem, a KPI that's off, and you've got a PIK, I would keep it in the pipeline. And the other scenario would be if you have what I call a challenge account. A challenge account is an account you know you're never going to close, but you keep them in the pipeline to stimulate your creativity. Because for the client that you know you are going to close, you wouldn't be as creative. So I always have one. Perhaps I'll do this in another seminar or another webinar. I'll show you my challenge account. It's with Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks, and how I create new ideas which don't lead to success there, but lead to success with other prospects that are easier to close. If you have any questions, call me at andy@urgencybasedselling.net. And so that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Our next webinar will be in a week on 3/17. Place yourself in the path of growth. Place yourself in the path of growth. So we hope you'll join us again. Thanks so much for being with us today. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you. Bye.